right.
Okay. Go on. Hello and welcome to Kirtan London, Journey to Joy, with your hosts, Madhva and Caitanya Cintamani. This is episode number 5. We are so happy and grateful to be doing this and to be going through this awesome sacred literature, the Bhagavad Gita, with all of you.
That's
and today,
right.
I think is going to be another good session. There's a lot of very, very interesting content that we're going to cover in today's session. So before we do that, I'm going to hand you over to Cintamani, who's going to take us through our invocation, and then we'll dive straight in.
Right. So we're just going to invoke the mercy of great and ancient persons who have come before us, so that we can say something beneficial. Om Jnana-timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namah Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Sarasvate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare.
Jai. Beautiful. Thank you, Cintamani.
Thank you.
By the way, it is such a nice day today, isn't it?
It's really gorgeous. I sat in the car in the sunshine, which is something that I do a lot, and I just soaked it all up.
1 second. I want to move the live stream to my other screen so I can see that as well.
Okay.
So I can see if any comments come in. Fantastic. Fantastic.
Nice.
All right, Cintamani. Did you remember?
So last time was quite a jam-packed session. We talked about the 3 modes of material nature. So goodness, passion, ignorance, and then we talked about the value of what's called transcendence. So the mode which outranks all those other modes, and the operating platform that Krishna recommends for Arjuna to be able to do his duty most effectively. And basically, the bottom line is that we should be doing what Krishna tells us to do, and in that way we avoid reactions. So another thing that we discussed was karma, and how every action has a reaction. So by operating on Krishna's level of transcendence, then we are able to avoid negative reactions and positive reactions as well, because we want those highest transcendental spiritual reactions. And we also talked about I think that was the threefold miseries, and how we might receive miseries from nature, from higher powers, from our own minds, and from other living beings around us, family, friends, animals, like that. So those are the 3 types of miseries.
Oh, wow. You have a good memory.
And there was so much more, but it's just not coming back to me.
Okay. And so for today's session, when we advertised it in the little video we made, I said how we'd be talking about what is yoga really, what is the ultimate goal of yoga? And what are the signs and symptoms of a real yogi? Some very interesting stuff to cover in today's session. And I feel like it's very relevant to today's world as well.
Yeah, it's absolutely important that we know what a real yogi is and what real yoga is.
How are you feeling, Cintamani? You want to kick us off?
All right. So yoga, right off the top, in text 48, we're on chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita. So we're actually halfway through it. And right there in text 48, then Prabhupada gives some interesting meanings to the word yoga, which we don't necessarily see that particular type of yoga today. But he says, what is yoga? Yoga means to concentrate the mind upon the Supreme by controlling the ever-disturbing senses. So that's quite lofty. Most people nowadays, when they think of yoga, they're like exercise, small pants, and it's like a workout. It's a trend. It's an aesthetic. Yoga is like, it's cool, But what he's describing here is actually quite full on. Concentrate the mind upon the Supreme by controlling the ever disturbing senses.
Is right. Which verse is that again?
This is 248. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Perform your duty equipoised, O Arjuna, abandoning all attachment to success or failure.
Right.
Such
right
equanimity is called the yoga. And then in the purport, you're pulling that from the purport.
Yes. That's right. And what is yoga? Yoga means to concentrate the mind upon the Supreme by controlling the ever-disturbing senses.
How do we do that?
Well, we have to break it down a bit, I think. Just reading it out loud made me think, this is a big concept.
I think he does go on to talk more about that.
Mm-hmm.
As in, how do we do that? Comes up in the verses between 55 to 59, I believe. We'll get a little bit more about how we can do that, because he talks about this idea of false renunciation.
Yeah.
Right? And he talks about what real renunciation looks like. And I believe that, to me, ties in to this idea of controlling the ever-disturbing senses. It's connected, it's linked to this idea of renunciation as well.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because here we're getting a real... This is why I said it's relevant, because yoga in today's day and age is actually... People call yoga what is technically would be called asana or physical practice.
Right.
But yoga is such a deeper, more elaborate, more spiritual concept,
Right.
which relates to this. It relates to connection with God. It relates to reawakening this loving relationship, this bhakti, which means loving devotion, in relationship with the divine. That's actually what yoga is. And then the physical practice that we see is what we understand to be yoga in today's day and age, was a practice that was designed to help us control the mind so that we could do this.
Right. It's just one branch of it, really.
It's one, and if anything, it's a small branch of it, which is interesting.
We've been missing out as a society. We've only got the outer, the crust of it. We've not been getting this the essence of it.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I just noticed. I feel like I'm tired. I feel so easily distracted today. So I'm just going to say what distracted me, and it was seeing my haircut. The UK just entered, or just came out of, a certain level of lockdown.
Right.
And so barbershops finally opened. and I've been able to cut my hair after months of it growing out and being overgrown and bushy. And I just got distracted by my own image of a man with a haircut.
Wow.
I'm not very good at controlling my senses and fixing them. My senses are pretty much constantly disturbed, it seems.
Well, it's time for some yoga, Madhva.
Oh, okay. I really like this point. I feel like this could be churned. This idea of what yoga really is.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we hear there's so many terms when you go a little bit deeper. In fact, a lot of people come to, let's say, Kirtan, for example, through yoga. I know through Kirtan London, I meet a lot of people where I used to meet a lot of people. I haven't met anyone in a long time, but I used to meet a lot of people at the Kirtan events who came to Kirtan through some initial introduction in a yoga class or an asana class.
Mm-hmm.
And we often say Kirtan is the music of yoga, because in one sense that's true. In another sense, it's Kirtan is yoga.
Right.
So this whole concept of what yoga is really has been misconstrued and misunderstood. But I feel like we're starting to see, especially with the rise in popularity of Kirtan, because it is becoming very popular. We see someone like Janavi, for example, now, who's been making Kirtan tracks with very famous celebrities, and it's becoming slowly it seems to be almost entering mainstream, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And so hopefully we'll start to see, with that increase in awareness, with that growth of Kirtan, people start to become more aware of what is yoga really, and how can I take advantage of it, because there's so much here, there's so much that we can take and use in our lives to really achieve our ultimate goals.
Right. It's so much more than working out and, just becoming flexible. It's we do ourselves a disservice, really, by not looking at this higher aspect of controlling the mind and senses, austerity, being connected with Krishna. The literal meaning of the word yoga is connection.
Yeah.
And it's connection to Krishna, to the divine, to source energy, whatever you like to call him. We're calling him Krishna here, but if we're just like focusing on the exercise, then we miss out big time on the higher, much more fulfilling aspect.
Absolutely. For physical exercise, there's so many things. Yoga's great. In fact, it's fantastic. Even if it is just for physical exercise, fine. It's a good form of doing that. I think you could say it's exercise in the mode of goodness in some sense. Well, it depends. I think you can do it in passion as well. But we spoke about the modes in the last episode. So if that went over your head, the mode of ignorance, the mode of goodness, and the mode of passion, you've got to go back and check out last week, or the last episode we did.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a great way of working out, but there's so much more there. And it's nice. It's nice to hopefully see. And I think there's more people like you and me right now, Cintamani, who are trying to help explain or unpack what yoga really means. There's a lot of nice, wonderful people out there sharing the deeper meanings of these beautiful philosophical, spiritual concepts.
Yes. Hopefully Kirtan will be just as widely known, just as important as all other types of music. It will be a dream to just like walk into a shop or somewhere, or to the airport or something, and just hear like Kirtan in the back, just the same way that you hear random music nowadays.
I know. It's like that in India. You travel around India.
Yeah, in Kolkata airport, you can hear Karnamrita and you can hear Sri Prahlad.
Okay, well, I just want to look at this verse again. So Perform your duty equipoised, O Arjuna, abandoning all attachment to success or failure. Such equanimity is called yoga. And then, like you said, yoga, Prabhupada goes on to explain in the purport. The purports are commentaries on the verses, on the actual spoken Bhagavad Gita. They're Prabhupada's commentaries, Srila Prabhupada's commentaries, the author of the book. So he goes on to say that, give a slightly different context to that meaning of yoga. He says yoga means to concentrate the mind upon the supreme by controlling the ever-disturbing senses, like you said. So there's some interesting point being raised here, just to go a little deeper in what is being described as the meaning of yoga. But it's fixing our mind or connecting our mind or our consciousness with the divine, or with Krishna,
Right.
or with God, or whatever you may call him. That's yoga. And there's two slightly different contexts given on that as well. So Prabhupada gives a very clear explanation. Concentrate your mind upon the supreme. So we might look at that as doing kirtan, for example, where we're chanting sacred mantras and focusing our mind on the supreme.
Mm-hmm.
We also do another type of mantra meditation called japa. So we sit and we chant. By the way, we've had an incredible group of people who did a January mantra meditation challenge with us.
Oh.
We did a japa challenge. Every morning at 6:30 in the morning during the month of January, a group of 30 to 40 people were coming together on Zoom and doing half an hour of japa every day, this mantra meditation. It was incredible. And when we finished, it was so nice. None of us really wanted to stop. So we continued on a weekly basis. So now we meet every Monday morning at 6:30 and we do japa. And a lot of people have carried on doing it. Anyway, I digress. I told you anything's going to distract me today, so forgive me.
It's all good.
It's been really a long day. I've done 2 12-hour days of work, but I'm happy to be here nonetheless. I'm not complaining. I'm enjoying this. But yeah, so these are one type of focusing our mind on the divine that Prabhupada gives us. I understand that to be quite straightforward form of meditation, meditating, focusing the mind on the divine. But Krishna is giving a slightly different context in the verse itself. And he's saying, perform your duty equipoised, abandoning all attachment to success or failure. So what that is saying, sorry, I have an itchy nose. I know I keep scratching.
Are you okay?
Probably looks so funny. I have an itchy nose. I'm going to itch it and then carry on. So what I take away from that verse is Krishna is telling us that it's not just meditation, it's all of our activities in this world, right? So, for example, I could be going to work. Now I can be doing that for myself, or I can be doing that because it's my duty in this world. I could be making dinner for myself and my family, and I could be doing that for myself, or I could be doing that because it's my duty in this world. And you can do the same activity, which is an action in this world, but if you're doing it as a way to please Krishna, and you're not doing it to please your own senses, then that also becomes a form of yoga.
Right.
Which is great. I think it's so nice, and it touches on this point, which I think comes up again, because we sometimes talk about or think to be spiritual. We often have what I consider a very Buddhist approach to what spirituality means. Often that is withdrawing from the world, going within ourselves, going to a quiet place and just meditating. Whereas
emptying the mind of thoughts, thinking about nothing.
Exactly that. Exactly. Yeah. Emptying the mind, thinking about nothing, just transcending everything. Whereas the Bhagavad Gita gives us almost the polar opposite to that, and explains why that approach doesn't work and why we must act, but we must act for the pleasure of the divine. That's the crucial point there.
And I think that's one of the key kind of points of kirtan as well. Like, we're not trying to empty our minds, we're trying to fill our minds with this high vibration. So it's like, it's completely different. It's actually the opposite action.
Exactly.
It's much more effective like that.
And again, this comes back to that point, which is in one of the slightly later verses here, where it talks about false renunciation. And I feel like that's relevant here as well. That relates to this.
Mm-hmm.
You say, it talks about how you can't just give something up. You need to replace it with something higher. And that's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to falsely renounce anything. We're not even trying to falsely renounce our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions. What we're actually trying to do is replace it with something greater. And then naturally we lose our taste for these things, because they give the example of a satiated person having just eaten an incredible meal of so many wonderful, tasty things. If they're then presented with a piece of stale bread, they're going to be unattracted to it. They're not going to want it.
Exactly.
And when you're tasting that relationship with the divine, then when we see these material so-called sense gratificatory opportunities for enjoyment, it's compared to that piece of stale bread. I don't want that. I'm getting something much greater.
Mm-hmm.
Lofty. All of this stuff is lofty at the end of the day. What can we say? Because we're not there. But anyway, this is what we're working towards. And it's, I heard one of our good friends, myself and Cintamani were talking about him earlier. Sorry, just on this topic of lofty.
Go ahead.
Quick digression. He was saying that ideals are lofty in nature because we need to know what we're working towards. And they can be good in that they give us direction. They can also be bad in that we can feel guilty that we're not there yet. And we berate ourselves a little bit. This was in another podcast. And they were actually speaking to one of our very, very dear spiritual teachers whose name is London Swami. And he gave a really beautiful example about that, because he was saying sometimes when he feels like Jai Jagannath was saying he feels like a hypocrite because he has these lofty ideals, yet at the same time he feels so far in reality from his ideals that he feels like a hypocrite. And he was saying this in relation to prayer. It made him feel disengaged from his prayers because he felt like a hypocrite.
I understand.
London Maharaj was replying. He actually told the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And he was saying how we all have that within us. And we're not hypocrites. It's our nature to be like that. We have a higher and a lower nature, and that's okay. And he said that when we approach these spiritual topics, we just bring our full self. We're honest about where we're at. And we present that, and we bring that to all of our activities, including our prayer. So it's a small digression.
No, I
but
think
it was in
it's
relation
relevant.
to that. Yeah.
I definitely think that's relevant as we go now to talk about controlling the senses and all these type of things. We should know that we should look on ourselves with a modicum of compassion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're often so hard on ourselves. We have to be better friends to ourselves, like we would be to our friends.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Right.
I don't know which verse you were looking to go to. I was actually looking at text number 50 next.
Okay, let's go there.
Okay. So for those of you who may be following along with us, by the way, welcome to the room, Jai. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us here live on Zoom. If there's anyone joining us on YouTube, that's great as well. Thank you for joining us. Feel free. I can see the YouTube comments. So if you have any questions or comments whilst we're going through this, please feel free to drop them in the comment section on YouTube. Same for yourself, Jai, here with us on Zoom. Feel free to drop a comment in the comment section if you have any questions or thoughts, and we'll try to make sure to cover that as well. And if you want to read along with us, if you want to open the Gita with us whilst we're doing this, then we're currently looking at chapter 2, text 50. We've just come off of text 48. So feel free to open that up and read along with us as well.
Right.
All right. So text 50, I'll just read the translation of the verse. A man engaged in devotional service rids himself of both good and bad reactions, even in this life. Therefore, strive for yoga, which is the art of all work.
The art of all work. I like
know.
that.
Me and Sundari were reading that earlier today, and we also noticed that phrase. Very beautiful phrase.
It's very fine. It makes it sound so so refined. The art of all work.
Quite like to be refined. So I can kick this one off.
Go ahead.
A person engaged in devotional service rids themselves of both good and bad reactions, even in this life. So my understanding of that is this devotional service is this activity for the pleasure of the divine. That is devotional service. And so he goes on to elaborate what happens when we do that. When we do that, we're ridding ourselves, we're actually cleansing our karmic reactions. So this is another topic which we've spoken about in previous podcasts, but I'm sure it will come up regularly because it's such a key integral part of trying to understand many of the concepts that we'll cover. It's this idea of karma. So we're all always creating karma for ourselves, and currently we're living the reactions of our karma that we've created in the past. So Krishna is telling us that when we act in devotional service, we're actually burning off karma. And karma it's binding us or keeping us here in this, on this material realm. And what's interesting is he says it rids us of both good and bad karma, not just bad karma. Because on the highest level, we don't even want good karma. Now, this is a really interesting point. This is where I feel the Gita is so profound and so deep. It has such incredibly comprehensive answers to some of life's deepest questions. So, for example, sorry, again, it always feels like a digression, but it's on the same point. So, for example, if a person lives a very pious life, the perspective of the Gita, they may not be God conscious, or they may not be striving for anything spiritual or for anything higher than their own sense enjoyment, but they go about doing that in a very pious way, in a very, what we might call mode of goodness way. They don't cause much harm in their life. They give lots of, for example's sake, they give lots in charity. They really take care of those around them. They're always striving to be a good person. This person is now accumulating good karma. But even good karma is continuously binding in this material cycle of, we call it the samsara, cycle of birth and death. It's another concept, reincarnation, which will continuously come up. So for that reason, it's binding us to this material realm. Even if we get elevated, we have a concept in the Vedic perspective understands the material realm and includes, we have this earth planet, and we also have the heavenly planets and the hellish planets. So similarly, you might say to all the faiths or religions of the world, the difference from the Vedic perspective is that those places are part of the material world. They're not permanent places. So you may go to heaven, but it's not permanent. You may go to hell, but it's not permanent. There's no eternal damned hellfire in the Vedic perspective. Yeah. If you mess up your one chance, that's how some people see it. You mess up this one life, that's it. You're eternally damned in hell. We We don't see it like that. You may have to go to hell if you live a hellish life, if you live a very sinful life. There's reactions to that. We all have to. So in the same way, we may go to heaven, but even that's not permanent, in the same way that hell isn't. The only thing that's permanent is when we transcend this material samsara, birth and death, reactions, whether they're good and bad, by performing devotional service. That's what Krishna is saying here. When we perform devotional service, which is activities which are no longer about just pleasing ourselves, they're activities which are aimed at pleasing Krishna. Those activities take us beyond this material realm. They take us beyond the heavenly planets, and they take us to the spiritual world, which is eternal. It's Sat, Chit, Ananda. So it's eternal, full of knowledge, full of bliss. And once we get there, then we're no longer affected by the suffering of this material world.
And when that relationship to Krishna is missing, that's when you end up with temporary reactions to activities. So Krishna is the thing that makes your actions, everything you do, permanent. We were talking about like spiritual bank accounts and how, you know, you act on a spiritual level, and that goes towards your eternal benefit. But without Krishna, the actions remain temporary.
Krishna is the secret ingredient.
Yes.
Says here in the purport, since time immemorial, each living entity has accumulated various reactions of his good and bad work. So we've been in this material world for a very long time, and we have a lot of karma. But we can remove that. It says we can remove that by the good instructions of the Bhagavad Gita. So we're on the right track, Cintamani. We're doing the right thing.
Hey.
The Bhagavad Gita is considered in many ways the foundation or the ABCs of spiritual life from the Vedic perspective. It's a really great book. It's a great book to be doing this around. And I hope Absolutely. If we were saying earlier, me and Cintamani were speaking before the podcast, and I was lamenting, and I was saying, I don't feel like I'm able to do this book justice. And Cintamani reminded me, she says, the book does itself justice. You don't have to do it justice. The justice is in the book already. And it was so encouraging. I thought, that's nice. If maybe even someone just feels encouraged to go and read the book from this podcast, that would be a win. So please feel free to do that. Go find it and read through it.
Oh, yes.
All right.
So then.
The very next verse. The next thing I spoke about I'll let you take over from here, Cintamani, because I've said a lot, but I remember saying in the advertising video, what is real yoga? What is the ultimate goal of yoga?
Mm-hmm.
And what are the signs and symptoms of a real yogi? So this next verse, text 51, at least to me, appears to give a very clear answer of what the ultimate goal of yoga is.
Right. Can you point me out?
It's in the text, it's in the translation, in the verse.
By thus engaging in the devotional service to the Lord, great sages or devotees free themselves from the results of work in the material world. In this way, they become free from the cycle of birth and death and attain the state beyond all miseries by going back to Godhead. Back to Godhead. There's something that we can unpack. There's so many little parcels of wonderful things that we need to open. It's like Christmas.
Reading the Bhagavad Gita is like Christmas every time.
Oh, every time we go through it, it's just like something new and amazing.
Do you want to unpack it a little bit?
All right, we can go there just a little bit. I just need to turn my light on because the sun is going down.
Okay.
I'm just gonna reach over because
Plug it in.
yeah. Sorry.
No, it still looks pretty nice in there. It hasn't got too dark in there yet, but I guess it will. Oh yeah, I can see.
Yeah, it's about to. Okay, that's better. Right. So back to Godhead. Now, this is very much a Prabhupada term. I feel like this is his thing. He made a magazine way before he came to America. He had printed this magazine called Back to Godhead, and basically, it's kind of the goalpost. Goalpost? Yes, like the that's our north star for a practitioner of bhakti. The wish, the goal, the dream is to be back to Godhead, and it's cool because back. So it's where our souls belong ultimately. Um, this place where we are right now, material world, it's temporary, and we're born, we're dying, we experience happiness, distress, and all these kind of dualities which we've been talking about. So then where do we experience transcendence all the time? That place is Godhead, and that's um, that's Krishna's place. So is that okay? Have I explained it okay? Should I keep explaining?
Of course. No, of course it's okay. It's more than okay. It was great.
All right. Yes, so Krishna's place, that's back to Godhead, and that's where ultimately, once you're free from the cycle of birth and death, where do you go? Back to Godhead.
It's funny. Sometimes it feels funny talking about these things, doesn't it? But I think at the end of the day, when we're talking about spiritual topics, we have to acknowledge that there may be things that appear far out. They appear incredible, but that's the nature of spirit. And so there has to be some acknowledgement and understanding that when we're talking about things on a spiritual level, not everything is going to be things within our current material dimensions of understanding, in a little box of understanding that makes sense to us. So we talk about there's concepts that appear fantastical, such as the spiritual world. But this is another beautiful point that Satchidananda Swami mentioned in this other podcast that I was watching, and he was saying that life itself is so clearly a spiritual phenomena. If we stop and think about it, it's fantastical. So just from conception is a fantastical thing, that all of a sudden a life is created. Where does life come from? Life itself is a spiritual concept. And it's true. I think when we think about the idea of there's some examples. An oak tree, it comes from this tiny, tiny little seed that's planted in the earth, and all of a sudden it takes nutrients and whatever minerals it needs from the earth, and it just water, and it grows and it grows and it grows into this incredibly huge tree. It's fantastical. But we sometimes limit ourselves by logic or just narrow-mindedness or closed-mindedness. So anyway, I hear your concern when we're talking about these things which appear fantastical. They can sometimes make us feel self-conscious that it was relatable to the listeners.
Yes, where's one worried, like, do I sound like a crazy person? Like, there's a magical place, and but, but no, it's spirit. It doesn't. It's not. I couldn't make it up even if I wanted to. But it's all. It's outside of our current reality, so sometimes it can be hard to digest or explain as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
There are things that we can't see. There's another nice book that I'm currently reading called The Book of Dharma by an incredibly talented author called Simon Haas. I pull on one of his other books that I've read, which is called The Dark Night of the Soul. It's a fantastic, fantastic book. It's also it's another commentary on the same text, the Bhagavad Gita. And he has another book called The Book of Dharma. It's relevant because we're talking about, Krishna says to Arjuna, perform your duty, or another word, the Sanskrit word for that is dharma.
Right.
Anyway, he talks about the creation of the airplane. And he says how there was a point where, I forget the name of the two, I believe there were two brothers who created the first plane. But through a consistent trial and error, eventually they realized that with two wings and enough speed, it created lift. And it's, if you think about that, that's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's utilizing this energy that we don't see, and all of a sudden this huge heavy metallic object is taking off of the earth, from the earth. Something that you couldn't lift in a million years if you tried is all of a sudden just floating up into the air. And it's using this thing that we don't see called air, and it's working in this thing that they call lift. Anyway, there's so many fantastical things about this earth, so we should just approach these things, well, not that we approach them as we approach them, Cintamani, but for those who are listening, just be aware, I suppose. Caveat, beware. Fantastical things about to happen.
There's a very nice drama that I've seen. Is it Bhaktivedanta players who do the drama with the frog in the well? You know,
Yes.
he stays in the well and he only has conception of the well, and he's never seen anything outside of the well. And someone comes and tries to explain to him about the ocean and, you know, the rest of the world, and he's not having it. And he's just like, no, I'm cool in my well. And he just hangs on to that for all his days, and he misses out on this huge, massive world that he could have been a part of, because he was just like sitting in his well. So yeah.
Such a great example. I'm going to do a quick drawing of another thing you're reminding me of. I think
Are
it was a
you
Christian
doodling?
guy. I'm going to doodle something. So a Christian guy say to make this point, because it was in reference to science.
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't. Sorry, I know. I feel like I bashed science last time as well. I don't mean to just bash science. Science has its place. Science is great in many ways, but sometimes it can create a very narrow-minded approach in people. So, anyway, he shows he says he had a conversation with a scientist where he said science actually acknowledges that the universe is so vast, and what they claim to understand or know about the universe is minuscule in comparison. See, I think I may have even done science. I may have even given them more credit here. So imagine if this is the universe. See this here?
Mm-hmm.
This is about as much as science knows down here. And so he was acknowledging and accepting this. I mean, I think this is giving science too much credit. It'd probably be like a dot somewhere like that. That's about as much as it knows in relation to the universe. But this Christian gentleman then said to the scientist, all right, so you know that much about the universe, and there's so much more to know, yet you vehemently claim there's no God. But surely, if you don't know anything about here, there's space for God out here, isn't there? And the scientist had to say, I guess so.
Maybe.
We know so little through our limited senses about. Anyway, that again, I can go off on this subject about so many things, and I don't think there's much point. Better we just stick to the text.
Well, yeah, back to Godhead. I mean, there's plenty of proof that we don't belong here. Perhaps for another time we can get into it. But yes, that's the concept. Back to Godhead.
Yeah.
So that would be more on the ultimate goal of yoga. Mhm.
Just thinking to highlight one little piece of the text here as well. Well,
Yeah.
one thing that Prabhupada that goes on to explain in the text, in the purport, is that he says, we don't realize that the material world is not really a place of happiness. We think that it is, and therefore we're constantly trying to change our circumstances here. He doesn't give the analogy here, but in other places he gives the analogy of a prison. He says, we're in prison, and yet we're not thinking about how can we get out of prison. What we're thinking is, how can I make my experience in prison more comfortable? So how can I get, I don't know what prison, how can I get that extra packet of cigarettes, or how can I get more yard time? How can I get whatever it is? How can I get that extra sandwich at lunchtime? Or whatever it might be. And so he compares that to us here in the
Right.
material world, and how we think. We're thinking we are, what's the word? We're doing ourselves an injustice constantly by going for the lowest common denominator of pleasure that we can achieve, when there's so much more available to us if we choose to turn our face that way. And this is what we've been touching on as well. Krishna was saying earlier, stop acting for your own pleasure and start to act for my pleasure. This is what's really going to make you happy. This is what's going to liberate you from the suffering condition that you're in. This is your true nature. And when you connect with your true nature, that's how you become truly happy.
What was it you said earlier? It was so good. I liked it. Upgrade your desire. Is that what you said? Upgrade your desire.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. We have to become attached to higher and more transcendental pleasure. That's the benefit of yoga on the higher platform. Apart from great abs and whatever, you get that transcendental pleasure on the highest level.
So true. I'll just read the last sentence from this verse as well, because it relates to what I was just saying. But one who, understanding that his position is to serve, transfers himself to the service of the Lord, at once becomes eligible for Vaikuntha Loka, which means going back to Godhead. So when we transition this mentality of trying to serve ourselves to wanting to serve Krishna, that's our eligibility right there. Easier said than done.
Easier said than done. And many people, when they hear, about being a servant, they get kind of put off. But servant is actually quite a high level. And people don't realize that they have to serve someone anyway. They serve their family, the government, the country, themselves. But what if you could serve someone who is so very grateful, and that whatever you do for them is coming back to you tenfold in this wonderful way? It's like a completely different concept of service. And actually, it's not a low concept. Like, people think that a servant is like a lesser person. Oh, he's a servant. He eats scraps, and he wears rags. But a servant of Krishna is someone who is actually very elevated and extremely happy.
Such a nice point. Krishna consciousness takes things that, from a material perspective, feel negative. We talk about things like surrender and being a servant. And from the material, commonly understood perspective, both of those words feel, you pull away, there's some there's some opposition to that,
Mm.
because we've generally seen those words used in a negative way. We've seen them come from a place of greed, from a place of lust, from a place of abuse. And so we associate those words with those things. But when we talk about those things from a Krishna conscious or God conscious perspective, whatever you may call God, these things are all in relation to love. They're not in relation to greed, lust, anger, abuse. And so when we say you want to serve, our position is to serve Krishna. Imagine I think one of the easiest relationships to create an analogy for that is the relationship between a parent and the child. It's often given in relation to this, that the parent loves the child so much that you may have a high court judge who, when he goes to work, he's extremely well respected. Everyone deals with him with deference, with reverence. But then when he goes home, or when she goes home, her young child, or his young child, will sit on his back and ride him like a pony. Come on, Dad. Come on, Mom. And he becomes the servant of this young child. He's the servant. He's there to serve the child's needs, but it's not from a place of abuse. It's from a place of love. And it gives the parent so much satisfaction, so much nourishment. Their real deep nourishment and happiness comes from those loving interactions, even though it's an interaction based on service and servitude. And it's a similar concept when we're relating to the divine and when we talk about service to Krishna. This is our nature. Our nature is to serve the divine. And like you said, Krishna then wants to reciprocate with us. And so he's not there to lord it over us and be cruel. But when we surrender and when we offer our life and service to the divine, what we get in return from Krishna is unmeasurable. And that's why it's considered such a senior position to have surrendered your life into service.
Yeah. Very
Beautiful.
nice.
Beautiful.
All right.
Should we finish? I don't know if you had a particular.
I think we can.
No, I was going to say with one more verse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a few minutes more.
Well, just maybe two quick last points. One, I thought maybe just briefly to touch on this point, because I know we don't have to spend too long on this, but text 53 says, when your mind is no longer disturbed by the flowery language of the Vedas, and when it remains fixed in the trance of self-realization, then you will have attained the divine consciousness. I thought this was another verse. Me and Cintamani were speaking before the podcast today, and this is one that we highlighted. It's the Vedas. So just to give a quick context on how there are different types of scripture in the Vedic canon. One is the Vedas. Then we have Upanishads and Puranas. And the Vedas very much deal with material sense enjoyment, but in a pious way. And they lead us gradually, they elevate our consciousness to a level where we can hopefully become purely God conscious. But people often get caught up in the flowery words of the Vedas, and they get confused and misled. And they think that all of this material descriptions of how you can elevate yourself materially, they think that is the summum bonum, the ultimate goal of the Vedas. They miss that it's leading you to a higher level, which the Upanishads and the Puranas go into, of God consciousness. So it's not necessarily super relevant to today's day and age in the mainstream, because who is really studying the Vedas? In India, people still do this. This is a very relevant point that you might raise in India. But the essence of the point is that we're so caught up in material sense enjoyment. And in our common culture, it's so many other things. It's not necessarily done in a Vedic way, but it's, okay, let me get a nicer house or a nicer car or whatever it may be, better quality of life in one way or another materially. So when we're no longer disturbed by these things, and we're just fixed on service, we're fixed in divine consciousness, fixed in service or trying to achieve self-realization, then we have attained divine consciousness. So
Nice. Mm-hmm.
So should we just wrap up with the signs and symptoms of a real yogi?
Yes.
So Arjuna asked the question in text 54, and then 55 onwards give quite a few nice verses about that.
Yeah.
55 to 59.
He basically asks, how does a person who is, what does he say? What are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is merged in transcendence? How does he speak? What is his language? How does he sit? And how does he walk? This is quite a literal question.
Yeah, well, there was a nice lecture I listened to a few weeks ago, and he was explaining that this is metaphorical. Mm-hmm. Sanskrit is like poetry. So he's not literally asking, what language does he speak? Mm-hmm. He's not literally asking, how does he sit down? Does he sit cross-legged, or does he sit in an armchair, etc.? Or does he walk by skipping and hopping, or so on and so forth? How does he speak? How does he engage with the world? Well, how does he sit is how does he disengage? When does he choose to disengage? How does he walk? When does he choose to engage? How does he speak, and what is his language? I think that one's also somewhat literal in the sense that how does he talk to people? What is his language? How does he engage with people?
Right. So then he says, when a man gives up all varieties of desire for sense gratification, which arise from mental concoction, and when his mind, thus purified, finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he is said to be in pure transcendental consciousness.
Which verse is that?
Looking at 55.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So he's given up all varieties of desires for himself, right? For gratifying his senses. Then because of that, his mind becomes purified and he becomes self-satisfied. Means he doesn't need any kind of external validation for his senses. Then he is said to be in pure transcendental consciousness. So all those things which are polluting the consciousness, desires for this thing or that thing, anything that is not related to his spiritual path, all those things are purified.
Nice.
And Prabhupada, I don't remember if he says it in the previous verse, but he says that a person can use this little checklist here, so to speak, to check his symptoms, to see if he's a real yogi or not. I'm not a real yogi, I'll say it first. And then it's a long way to go.
Yeah. Aspiring yogis and yoginis. Actually, that's already a win.
Yeah.
To be aspiring for it. I feel.
I would agree with that. Mm.
We've had a few nice comments on YouTube from Ananda and from Jaguar. Ananda was saying, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a great example. She liked the comment about upgrade your desires. Jaguar made a comment, be human with spiritual knowledge. Jai Shri Krishna. I'm not
Nice.
100% what that was related to, but I'm sure he was picking up on something. Thank you for sharing that, Jaguar.
Right. Yes.
Okay, so the signs and symptoms, he goes on to give lots and lots of qualities. Essentially what he's saying is he's explaining how this person is. Well, just to give a little bit of context on Arjuna's question. Arjuna's also, he doesn't want to fight right now, so he's kind of trying to weasel his way out. And so he's thinking in his mind, he's thinking, well, surely a transcendental person would be detached from material things, so they wouldn't fight. No. And so part of his question is there's that underlying tone. And Krishna goes on to explain the signs and symptoms of a devotee. And then in the next episode, when we start chapter 3, Arjuna asks for further clarification. And he says, okay, now tell me explicitly, what should I do? Because in Krishna's explanation, it's a little bit dual. Sometimes the person is engaging, sometimes the person is disengaging. They're aloof, and yet they're also compassionate and concerned and involved. And so Arjuna gets a little bit confused by Krishna's answers. And then he goes on, there's just so much. Anyway, maybe we'll have to bring up some of these last verses when we start the next chapter. But just there's so much more here. Yeah. But again, really, it's impossible to cover all of the content in a podcast in this way. And so hopefully some of you are feeling inspired to go to the book itself and to take deeper knowledge and understanding directly from the source, which is what me and Cintamani are trying our best to churn. But I think that wraps up chapter 2.
Yes. More or less.
I did not remember to bring my harmonium up with me.
Oh, Madhva. Okay. What?
Is your guitar to hand?
Somewhere behind. I don't know if I've tuned it.
I can run and get it. It'd take me 1 minute. But
yes. Maybe you should, because I don't know how long it'll take me to tune the thing.
I tell you what, I'm just going to chant briefly. I'll do. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, we like to finish these podcasts, seeing as it's Kirtan London, Journey to Joy, we like to finish with some Kirtan. So some mantra chanting, some mantra meditation. Mantras are sacred sound vibrations, which we normally, pre-pandemic, would come together on a regular basis and chant congregationally, communally. And since the pandemic started, we've been doing a lot of that online via Zoom or Facebook or Instagram Lives, things like that. And we are a community of Kirtan lovers. And so we like to finish our podcasts with some Kirtan as well. So today was my turn. As you can see, me and Cintamani are in different locations, and so we take turns. I didn't bring my harmonium, but I'll just chant. Because
from the heart.
That's also fine. The point is the mantra. The point is not so much the musical accompaniment. So
there you go.
I don't think I need to turn on original sound if I'm just singing.
I don't think so, no.
Maybe you can just let me know if it, for some reason, isn't picking it up, and I'll switch over.
Okay.
I will actually turn on original sound because I'll play a little bit of mridanga. I have my mridanga here with me.
Oh, let's do that.
Yeah. But you might need to mute yourself is all.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I'm going to turn on original sound. Okay. All right. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Haribol.
Jai Haribol.
Wonderful, wonderful. You know, I've really missed the sound of mridanga. Like, I just feel really, really happy when I hear it.
I miss really playing mridanga.
Yeah.
It's not long now, hopefully.
Hopefully.
Thank you for a beautiful session, Cintamani.
Thank you, Madhva. And thank you, everyone who's listening and who's commenting and taking part so kindly.
Thank you all very, very much. Let's just see when we will be back. Let's have a look at the month. So today is the 14th. Our next episode is Wednesday, the 28th of April. Again, we'll be going live at 7 p.m. on Zoom. You can join us directly on the Zoom. Please feel free to do that. We generally open the room 5-10 minutes early, so we can always chat briefly here as well. We can connect after the session as well if you like. We also go live on Zoom. Thank you very much, Robert, for your comment. So you can also join us live on YouTube. And it would be nice to develop a community of people who want to do the same thing. That's really what we're trying to do with this podcast. Both myself and Cintamani, we want to try and go a little bit deeper into this sacred text, understand it better, hopefully take some of the knowledge there and use it in our lives. And the reason for the podcast is so that we can open that opportunity up for everyone to do together as well.
Yeah.
So please do join us.
Please do. Until then,
We'll see you next time.